Serious, Redditors who claim to have seen cryptids or other unknown creatures, what is your story? Another story about my dad. He told us this one a lot. When he was a kid he'd ride his bike on the gravel road about 2 kilometers to get to school. He lived in the country and this was the mid-50s. He said he was riding his bike home when a short distance ahead he saw a really tall, hairy, monkey walk out of the trees and cross the road. He thought a gorilla or something escaped from the zoo because that's the only thing he could think that made any sense. I asked him if he was scared and he said no. I always took my gun to school with me. My great-grandpa always tells us how when they walked to school with their guns they'd just have to make sure to give them to the janitor during school. Different times. The 50s were effing wild, man. My entire childhood, my father and I used to take late-night walks due to his insomnia from shift work. Our neighborhood is considered very safe and ultimately was an urban neighborhood besides one of the roads towards the back of the neighborhood being lined with thick forest for about a mile and about a quarter deep which made a circle back in itself. All of these walks are very dear memories of mine except one and attended being the last one. Along the road with the tree line, there was a single street light to illuminate a small plot of land that someone owned but was very overgrown and ill-kept. It was very common for us to walk this road to enjoy the sounds of the forest, the lack of illumination, and the ease of circling back. One ordinary night as we're walking and making conversation, my father abruptly stops, pulls me close, puts a hand over my mouth, crouches with me, and points towards the single illuminated plot roughly 100 yards away. At first, I didn't see anything and thought he was pulling my leg, but just as I began to protest his grasp, I see a very small humanoid figure, roughly 3 feet in height, scrawny, with long limbs, materialize out of the plot's brush line and cautiously take in its surroundings before signaling towards the brush. After a few seconds, 2 other small, humanoid figures materialize as well. After a brief moment of what looked to be a discussion, all 3 make a dash for the forest tree line. Once this happened, my father picked me up, threw me over his shoulder and made a break for our home, which was roughly a half-mile back. Mind you, my father is 6'5", 220 pounds and I was roughly 120 pounds at this time and he never showed signs of slowing due to his fear and adrenaline. After this night, we never took late-night walks. He installed 4 bright motion detection lights around our acre plot, and brought home a dog. The few times I've tried bringing it up, he doesn't want to discuss and made it clear he never wanted to. Those figures still give me chills and the image of the 3 huddled together is very vivid 15 years later.
I've had very similar experiences. Like yours, not much noteworthy, but that feeling and more importantly the reaction from my dog. I'm not in the Sierra Nevada range but not that far north of them. I spend the majority of my free time in the summer months hiking, camping and fishing. I'm familiar with the area, wildlife, and the ecosystem in general. I haven't posted anything like this just cause I've never had more than the feeling of being watched and the reaction from my dog. About the dog, he's a very experienced mountain dog and quite large. Great Pyrenees, male, 130-ish pounds. Nothing spooks him. I've literally seen him square off with a mountain lion. It was on the smaller side so I'm assuming juvenile male. Which a couple good growls and posturing on my dog's side sent that cat running. Had another in the same area. We could hear it crying. It seems to have come to the tree line about dusk and the dog quickly scared it off in the same fashion. The dog doesn't get spooked, he's a giant happy idiot 99% of the time. But, there's been a couple of times where he and I are out hiking and the woods go silent. Dead silent. Normally I'd assume a predator or more likely people in the area, but those couple of odd times my normally fearless and happy-go-lucky dog decides he needs to be glued to my hip with his mane. If you're familiar with the breed, it's particularly distinct on males, standing on end and him clearly on edge. I should mention that a dog that size leaning on the hip of a grown man, even though he thinks he's being protective, has nearly sent me tumbling down a mountain. That dog on edge is what spooks me. He's come face to face with a predator in the wild and faced it head on, but the times he's clearly spooked have freaked me out. Late to the party, but oh well. One night my husband and I were driving home from somewhere, I think it was a friend's house but I don't remember, and we were taking some back roads when suddenly this creature ran out in front at our car and we had to slam on the brakes to avoid hitting it as it darted across the road into the woods. Its body looked like a human running on all fours, but it was way too fast to be human, and the head was like a boar's. It had tusks. We both saw the same thing, and were rightly freaked the fuck out about it. Later we dubbed it Man-Bear-Piglal. So, this happened to my son when he was 17 years old. We lived in New Mexico at the time. My son, Cody, was riding along with his friends Drew and Alex. They were in Drew's truck and Drew was driving. It was night and they were heading to Drew's house. Drew lived out in the country, so the road they were on was isolated and surrounded by desert. In fact, that whole area is flat and mostly dirt. As they're driving along, they see a man standing in the middle of the road. Drew slows down and they all expect the guy to move off to the side. The guy doesn't move. He just stands there. Drew slows to a stop. The guy is standing just outside the light from the headlights. He's wearing jeans and some sort of long-sleeve shirt. They couldn't make out the features of the guy's face, but they could tell he was facing them. Nobody moves for a few seconds. The kids start to talk about going around him, but aren't sure if they should pass by this guy or turn around and go another way. Suddenly, the guy drops to all fours and starts running towards the truck. All the kids start screaming. Drew slams the truck into reverse and floors it. Now, they're going backwards on this dark country road and this guy is chasing them on all fours. And he's keeping up with the truck. Drew goes faster and finally the guy drops out of sight. Drew turns the truck around and they all came back to our house. I was in the living room when they came running in, slammed and locked the door, and went tearing up the stairs to Cody's room. I went up to see what was going on and this is when they told me the story. I've never seen them so pale and frightened. They were completely freaked out. This happened on a Friday night around 8 p.m. These were kids that normally would rather be anywhere except home on a weekend. That weekend they stayed at our place the whole time. They didn't go out at all and then only left because they had school on Monday. It took a month before they wanted to go out again at night. They would go anywhere during the day, but at night they usually gathered at our house. After a little research, they all agreed that it was a skinwalker. Even to this day, if I bring up that night, Cody and his friends will get really quiet and look scared. It took a long time for them to get past it, and they still think that talking about it will make it come back.
This one did me in. That is terrifying. The visual terrifies me and I wasn't even there to see it. Just imagining it happening in the way the boys were so freaked out still scares me. Good news, talking about skinwalkers won't attract them. Bad news. It was a skinwalker in all likelihood. Your mates are very lucky. I was walking home one night at about 3 a.m. About a block from my house, down the road I saw an inhumanly tall figure in what appeared to be bright white cloth. I don't believe in ghosts and stuff. I made a comment about this and someone said it sounded like a Fresno nightcrawler. What bothers me though, is that if nightcrawlers are real, this one was easily almost 9 feet tall. Where most reports set them at no taller than 4 and one was at 6. It really didn't do anything besides walk across the lawns of the houses. By the time I got down the road, it was long gone. Though I did have the feeling I was being followed, watched the rest of the walk home. Edit, gonna say what I saw wasn't a nightcrawler, but something else. Not sure what it was to begin with though. I have seen one of these as well, although it was not as tall as the one you saw. I was at this park with my then girlfriend that has a neighborhood on one side and a few miles of pretty dense forest on the other. We were stargazing and as we sat in this opening near the neighborhood I heard a rustling in a patch of shrubbery that sounded like a person stomping around. I immediately got up to investigate, as this area is known for sketchy activity, drug deals and the like. What I saw made no sense. I still feel like I imagined it or something. I saw what looked like a person hunched over with a white cloth over them walk out of the bushes and stand on this path that goes around the entire park. I turned to my girlfriend and asked her what it looks like, without telling her what it looked like to me, and she described it exactly as I did. So, we hightailed it out of there. Booked it to my car and got in, and I, wanting to know WTF it was, turned on the high beams in the hopes it would follow us. It did not. Now, this is where the story gets even stranger. Please hear me out on this, as I have never shared this with anyone but those close to me and my girlfriend, and I never talked about it again. We went to another park cause we wanted to continue stargazing, so he drove a few miles to this other park that is essentially a giant field. We found a bench and sat down, and managed to forget about that weird encounter. After about 10 to 15 minutes of this, we suddenly saw, not heard mind you, what appeared to be a black helicopter fly over us in the direction of that first park. This thing was completely silent. No noise at all. I have not been able to find any pictures online that come close to what it looked like, but if you're familiar with Halo Reach, it looked like a falcon. This thing maneuvered like nothing I've ever seen. Granted, I don't know much about aviation, but it dipped over a tree line at angle so steep that we thought it was going to crash. The weirdest part of all of this is that there was someone else at this second park, an old woman walking her dog, that didn't react to the plane, helicopter at all. It was by far the strangest night of my life. We both agreed that maybe we had some bad food or something and decided to just go home and go to bed. I have yet to return to either park and I don't really ever plan on doing so. There's some really strange shit out there, man. I've posted this in a few other threads, but I love to tell this story of mine. Anyway, I was walking my dog and he started woofing and barking at the house across the street. I slowed down, trying to get a look at what he was seeing. There was this white grayish boomerang-shaped thing, flapping its wings really slowly like a manta ray in the water, but it was moving way too fast, circling our neighbor's house. It zoomed around the house, disappearing into the backyard and going back around the front maybe 5 times as I stood, staring at whatever it was. It was nighttime, but there was enough light to see that it didn't have any definable features. It was just an amorphous, boomerang-shaped thing, and it was flying with one wing pointed towards the ground and one towards the sky, vertically. People say it was an owl or a bat or another type of bird, but it didn't have feathers, or defined edges, or eyes, or a head, or anything animalistic. It was just a diffuse, oblong, unnatural shape less than 100 feet away from me, moving way too fast for how slow its wings were flapping. And then it disappeared behind the house. To this day I'm not sure what I saw, or if I even truly saw it. The prospect of it being a vivid hallucination is almost as scary, but my dog saw it too. I swear on my mother's grave I saw something that night. I don't know if I saw something or not. To back up a bit, my fairly non-religious, definitely nor spiritual mother claims to have been haunted for several decades. She says there is the ghost of an old man who stands next to her bed and silently screams. Sometimes he disappears for months, sometimes he shows up 3 or 4 times a week. She says he was around when I was a kid, but she never mentioned him to me or my sister until we were grown and moved out so we wouldn't be scared. He also followed us on a 300-mile move to another state, but it took him a year and a half. Like a dog who got lost at an interstate rest stop. My non-practicing Catholic stepdad used to laugh when she mentioned the ghost. About 10 years ago he switched to saying he'd seen him. My mom considers him annoying. She's often complained that she wishes the damn ghost would just let me sleep. Frank just confirms that sometimes he wakes up to an old man leaning over the bed silently screaming. I have a distinct memory of going home from college, hanging with old friends drinking, and waking up in the middle of night needing to piss. For a split second as I swung out of bed I remember seeing a scrawny old man with dark brown hair with his mouth wide open. but I didn't hear anything. I sprang out right where he was standing, moving before my eyes even opened. He was gone and I wrote it off to beer, weed, and the power suggestion, and haven't spent many nights at my folks' house since, and never saw anything else. But sometimes I wonder if the ghost finally decided after 19 years I was old enough to haunt, only to get freaked out when I jumped through him with a piss boner. A while back, I lived way out in the middle of nowhere in Oklahoma. Due to coyotes and other animals, I'd always go outside with a knife or machete. Well, one night I was taking out the trash. I was 11 or 12 at the time. The trash can was a good 50 feet from the house, surrounded by bushes and shrubs. Well, I put the trash in the can and went to head back when something reached from the shrubs and latched into my ankle. I figured I was caught on a branch or something, so I pulled my good harder. That's when I realized that those were fingers wrapped around my ankle, and that they were far too long to be human. I swung the machete at whatever was grabbing me, and I heard the most blood-curdling screech I've ever heard. I ran to the house. It was one of those shipping container-shaped trailers. The thing about those trailers is, you get a hole in the side panel and animals can get trapped under it. I heard it under the house that night, sounded like a big dog or something. Never found out what it was, luckily. I grew up in Kodiak. It's an island off the coast of Alaska, with a small town and a couple smaller villages surrounding the island. You can't get there unless you take a ferry or hop on a plane. Naturally, there wasn't much to do back in high school. I'd spend my time smoking out with my buddies and walking the trails. One normal day I thought it would be great to pick on my already paranoid friend A. The native Alutiiq elders always told stories of the Agulak, pronounced Aholak, very similar to a skinwalker. These beings were once humans who were outcasted from the village, and turned to black magic to survive. You can't talk about them. Very rarely would you get the opportunity to hear about someone's personal experiences. Well, that's where this story starts, thinking to myself it'll be funny to scare the crap out of my friend, right? I tell him everything I know of the being while we were out strolling through the trails. The sun starts to go down, and we're all a bit creeped out, so the three of us decide to head back to the car. As friend A is taking us home, friend B asks if I could buy him a pack of cigarettes. He just needed to run and grab his $10 bill from his room. So me and friend A listen to some tunes while we wait for him. He returns surprisingly quick and says, "I've only got $3, maybe tomorrow, man." Okay, no problem. We say our goodbyes and we head toward my house so I could get dropped off. As I'm sitting down on my bed, I get a text from friend B, "Hey, where'd you guys go? I thought we were getting cigarettes." I reply, trying to see if he really forgot our conversation not even 10 minutes prior. He's adamant that he ran inside, tore his room apart looking for his money, and by the time he found it, ran outside and saw we already left. He thought we just ditched him. So I tell him I could still get him his smokes, and walk over to his house to see if he's just fucking with me. He stands by his story to this day, and I believe him. That dude wouldn't prioritize a prank over his cigarettes. Thinking back, what were we talking about the whole afternoon before? Never spoke about the bean until today.
I was walking to meet up with my friend. I live in CT, so as far as I knew there was nothing here that could be a cryptic or unknown to us. Well, I was walking at around 11 p.m. go meet up with my friend to chill for a little. I approached this house, specifically the garage, because I cut through the yard. As I came closer to the garage, I noticed my friend. It was him. I did our call with a CHH sound, and this thing just looked at me with his face. Every detail was the same, and it was a full moon that night, so I could see him very clearly. I got closer, called his name, and he gave no response. I just thought he was being freak and fucking with me, so I continued on my way and Snapchatted him asking what the hell he was doing. He shortly sent me a Snapchat picture of him at a bowling alley in a town about 30 minutes away. This was all within 5-10 minutes of the sighting. I never saw anything again, but from then on I wasn't much of a night person anymore. I still can't shake the eerie and dreadful feeling I had when I saw that thing. I tend to not talk about the subject because of how much it genuinely scares me. I still can't think of what the thing was, but it mocked the appearance of my friend. This experience has seriously freaked me out, and I still refuse to walk alone at night. My grandmother had a story from the late 50s driving north on a paved 2-lane road lined with small trees and brush with my great-aunt and one of my uncles, Ron, who was about 2 years old at the time and was in the back seat. They rounded a turn while climbing a series of switchbacks up a hill. Now this is from memory because she passed away about 7 years ago now. I smelled it before we saw it. As they approached, it was standing beside the road, down a couple of feet in a ditch, but it was still taller than the car by a couple of feet. When her sister sees it, she grabs her by her arm and yells, "Look out, Barbara, it's a bear," and she replied, "That ain't no bear." It stood there and they passed it. It looked like a very large hairy man with hair all over its face, only its ears, lips and eyelids lacked hair. But what struck here as most interesting was that it had, or appeared to have had, no neck. Its head sat up in its shoulders in a strange way. While watching them, it turned its whole body and its hair was brown and matted like a stray dog. After they passed, she watched it in the rear-view mirror. It stepped up out of the ditch on the side of the road, and in one large step it stepped all the way to the center line of the road, and in one more step it cleared the road into the ditch on the other side of the road, and within 3 steps it had cleared 20 feet into the brush and trees and disappeared from sight. This whole time she said her sister was holding her arm, crying and jabbering away like a mental patient, and that they had both pissed in their seats. Ron in the back seat slept through it. Edit, my mother corrected some stuff. This isn't even remotely supernatural. At best, it's an unknown local species or a similar-looking native species. But in northern New England, we don't have any black panthers. Yes, I know there's technically no such thing, just all black jaguars or leopards. Yet people somehow keep seeing them on occasion. And I've seen one just casually walking down the middle of the road, until it noticed my car approaching, at which point it ran off into the woods. Pretty underwhelming, I know, but I know my cats, and I have coon cats, pretty big as a frame of reference, and my local big fauna, and this was close enough to my house that I wasn't confused by the background, and it was nothing normal. It was a frickin' huge black cat. Like the size of a Great Dane. No, I can't prove it. But it was there, and it was a giant black feline. There have been sightings of dark brown mountain lions. No one has found a completely black one in North America as far as I know. Maybe that's what you saw? I was going to suggest a fisher, but they aren't nearly as large as what you describe. There is also a cat called a jaguarundi that lives in South America and the southern US, but I doubt one would be way up in New England. I also have Maine Coons. Here is the pretty princess, Mulder. Trade pics? Tongue. Pics in question. Fisher. Jaguarundi. I used to live in a very old farmhouse. I was asleep at the time, but my sister woke up around 3 a.m. to get ready for work. She worked on my uncle's dairy farm, so early start. She walked past my room and said she heard very creepy deep laughing. I sleep in silence and wasn't awake at the time. She brought this up to me when I told her I woke up bleeding due to long scratches down my back and random bruises on my legs. Also had instances of hearing footsteps in my room when it was just me and things falling off of shelves on their own. Lots of creaking and scratching noises coming from the ceiling, but I figured that was just mice or bats in the attic. I had horrible insomnia all through my life and often woke up with bruises and scratches, but this was the first time they had bled. I always thought I did it to myself in my sleep. All of it stopped instantly when we moved 5 years ago. No more scratches, no more bruises, no more insomnia. Not much to mine, but as a child in Frankfurt I remember some nights when it was getting late, I would see a black figure fly over our apartments. I don't know for sure what it was, but I remember it flew silently. You wouldn't notice it if you didn't see it. It would fly fast, passing over in an instant. If I had to estimate from memory, I'd say it was about the size of a car. I wasn't the only one who saw it either. My neighbors saw it, parents everywhere. No one knew what it was. At the time, and today still, I mostly firmly believe it to have been some kind of massive bat. One more story. I was with my dad on a motorcycle trip and stopped somewhere between Idaho and Washington at a rest stop. We were stretching our legs and I decided to walk a bit through the woods at the edge of the rest stop. I went a little farther than I originally planned and decided I should go back. That's when I noticed a really old car in the trees, like 1930s. My dad and I are car buffs, so I went back to tell him about it and we decided to go all the way back in so he could see it himself. It took forever to find it again, it was really far deep in the woods. We got close to it, closer than I originally had the first time, and we could tell something was wrong. The 4 doors had been ripped off and were laying in the dirt around the car, and the entire interior was filled with sticks, like a nest. It was totally filled with sticks, and they were held together with a mixture of mud and what smelled like poop. It smelled absolutely awful. It was also full of hair. We got the creepiest feeling and ran out of there as fast as we could. Never went back and I have no idea what would have made a nest like that inside a car. I barely remember it now, but one night driving along a frontage road there was a tall pale amorphous figure standing on the side of the road. No matter how hard I looked at it as I drove past, there was no discernible detail. I tried to continue looking at it the rear view mirror after I'd passed it, but it was gone. Any ideas?
Mosquitoes like to gather in columns. They are dense enough that you can see what looks like tall ovals of mist hanging in fields or by roads. If this was during the summer, there's a good chance that was what you saw.
I really hope so. I've been thinking about this a lot since posting and it really seemed solid, whatever it was. I'm happy to explain it away as something ordinary though. Thanks. I was in southeast Missouri at a friend's lake house. We rode an ATV with a small trailer down and around the lake to deal with some beavers or something blocking some drainage area. There were 4 of us. 2 rode on the ATV and myself and another buddy rode on the trailer. We walked from the parked ATV down to the edge of the lake. The 2 who rode on the ATV brought the rifle down a bit from where we walked. My friend and I were about 75 yards from the ATV when we saw something approach it from the nearby tree line. It was stark white, like an albino animal of sorts. It was about as big as the ATV. It had the general shape of a mountain lion, but it had a very fluffy tail, like a wolf or coyote. It sniffed around the ATV for about 10 seconds, stared at us, and sulked slowly back into the woods. I'm an avid outdoorsman, was an Eagle Scout, and have spent a lot of time in the woods, but I've never anything like it or since. I'd imagine an albino, mangy mountain lion that was in a relatively populated area. There was a general store, deli that was a 5-10 minute drive from the lake house, someone would have heard about it. When I was around 10-12, I was up at my grandparents' camp in the Adirondacks for a weekend. I shared a room with my younger brother and I woke up one morning and looked out the bedroom window right behind the headrest. The camp was located right on the edge of the woods. It was pretty much up a trail that led to the edge of the deeper part of the woods, less inhabited by people, and probably 100-200 feet away were a group of turkeys wandering around the forest floor. I grew up going hunting with my dad, so I knew what turkeys looked like in the woods and what their size roughly was. However, right next to the turkeys, standing on a fallen tree, was what looked like a mix of a hawk and a turkey but with a humanoid shape. It was probably about 6-8 feet tall and looked to have a massive wingspan. Obviously all of my size estimates are based on a preteen me, however, it was right next to turkeys and I was very familiar with the size of turkeys. This was much larger and semi-humanoid. I never told anyone about it, kind of just woke up and went to eat breakfast a little too stunned to process that what I just saw I actually saw. And I was definitely fully awake as I watched it for a few minutes, just watch the turkeys wander. I thought I saw the Ogopogo up at Okanagan Lake in BC. You see the streaks in the water all the time, but it's usually just the waves being weird. One time though, I saw something poke its head out of the water only to dive right back down. Looked like a big snake from where I was standing. This happened when I was around 7 years old, my brother a couple years older. My family and I just returned from a movie, so it was dark out. We lived basically in the country and were surrounded by fields, but there was an edge of tall field grass and our yard that met it. Anyway, we get out of the car and my brother and I see something in the tall grass, a head with ears and 2 reflective eyes. We thought it was a deer, so we both run to the edge of the field to scare it, because we're dumb kids. Well, unlike how a deer should normally respond, this creature didn't run, this creature crouched. I have never had all my instincts kicking like they did. My adrenaline was high and I booked it out of there. I remember looking back and that silhouetted creature was dead still with 2 eyes reflecting the light from the house. Thinking back, it sounds a lot like a large cat, but those were not native to the area. So, if it was, that one would have to escaped or wandered very far. Also, I turned my back on it, which is bad to do with pack cats. That's my understanding at least. I also considered that since I was able to see 2 eyes reflecting at the same time, that it was a predator of some kind. 3 a.m. with my buddy. Pulled up to a light. I was a repo man at the time and we were out looking for cars, true story. I look over at a late 90s/early 2000s Honda CR-V. My exact words. Holy shit, that chick has no face. Looked like No Face from the Dick Tracy movie in the early 90s. Like an egg. She, creepiest part is I knew it was female. No idea how I knew, made a left and we went straight. That was it. Never talked about it again until a few years later. He thought he was asleep and dreamed it. This happened when I was about 13 or so, and I've told this story a million times and it always gives me chills. Me and 4 other friends would always camp in my friend's woods, and one weekend we decided to camp like we always did. We discovered those little pack of flares you could buy at Walmart and would just always burn stuff with them for fun and dig around with them. I had some really shitty machete and my friend asked if he could take the flare to it and hit it with a hammer and warp it and all that. Of course I didn't care cause it was a cheap machete. So while he's doing that and we're all watching, I hear something close to us and I look and it had to be at least 7-8 feet tall, but where it was 9 all I could see was an eye walking through the shadows. Which also looked red but may have been due to staring at the flare. I get up and I'm like, guys, and everyone was confused until a tree shook right behind my friend. We all group up and are absolutely terrified. One of my friends decides to call his mom and get the fuck out of there, which was the smartest thing any of us could have done, while 3 of them left to take the friend leaving back to the road. Me and another one stayed back in the tent. While sitting in the tent we heard something outside and we're like, okay, they're just fucking with us. When I swear to God a fucking finger goes alongside the tent, like is almost poking through the tent, just strolling down the side towards the front. So I call my friend back at the road and say, hey dude, were you expecting to hear him outside the tent? And he said at home, which is about 5 minutes from the campsite, and I almost called bullshit till I heard his little brother on the phone. I don't remember anything else from that night but remember that whole scenario perfectly, and we never had anything like that happen again, but it's definitely the most terrifying experience I've had in my life. One night while I was in college, I went for a distressing drive by the nearby lake. I'd circled around and was driving through the woods below the spillway. I was crossing over a small bridge when I saw a thing crossing the road. It looked like your stereotypical Bigfoot. It was probably 3/4 of the way across the road when I first saw it, and continued the rest of the way across to my left. As it stepped off the road, it passed behind a road sign, which was up to its mid-chest or shoulders. I went back the next day and got out of the car. That would have put it at around 9 tall. As I continued on, stunned, I drove a couple hundred feet when I saw a pair of deer darting across the road, away from where the thing had gone. I got the hell out of there. I was almost taken by a grindalo. When I was little, like 5 or 6, we went to a park near our house that had a pond. I was always fascinated with the small creatures, water bugs, fish, algae, everything, so I was squatting down staring at this incredible little universe, completely enchanted with it all. Suddenly something green came out of the water, grabbed my little shoe and pulled. It happened in an instant. My foot slid forward into the water and I fell backwards onto my butt. It was back in the water with a tiny splash as fast as lightning. I blinked, then got up and ran to my mom saying, "Something grabbed my foot and tried to pull me in the water." My mother tried to console me saying my foot simply slipped on the muck, but I know the truth. So heads up to anyone who lives in Milwaukee. The pond in Cozy Park on 7th and Lincoln has a grindalo. My grandparents had a vacation cabin in the Jersey Pine Barrens and my parents would send me out every year. I lived in Las Vegas at the time, over summer vacation to visit. The last time I was there, I was 8 in 1982. It was about 11 or so at night, grandparents are in bed and I'm reading Archie comic books. I still remember what I was reading, lol, by flashlight, when I hear the most god-awful scream come from outside. That scared the crap out of me, cause I had no idea what it was. I've heard mountain lions and coyotes before and that scream definitely didn't come from one of those. I turn the flashlight off and it's so quiet in the cabin, you could hear a rat piss on cotton. I hear the scream again, and this time it sounds like it's right outside my bedroom window. I'm almost pissing myself by this point when I hear a snuffling coming from right outside the window and something I can only describe as pebbles being tossed, rolled on the roof. There's no way in hell I'm looking, so I run and wake up Grandpa. He sees the terror in my face and grabs the light and checks the perimeter of the cabin. He comes back and says he couldn't see or hear anything. Needless to say, I sleep in their bed that night, lol. In the morning, we go outside and look under my window and, sure enough, you can make out hoof prints about the size of a fist coming from the woods and right up to my window. I thought it was a wild pig or something like that until I was playing on the other side of the house and noticed a similar set of prints leading away from the house on almost an exact line from my bedroom window. I get home and tell Dad about what happened. He grew up around the Pine Barrens, and what we saw, and he just nonchalantly says, "Oh, must have been the Jersey Devil." I had no idea WTF he was talking about at the time, but I never forgot that incident, and when I was a little older, I would spend time in the library reading books about the Jersey Devil, and it sure as hell sounds like that's whatever it was outside my window. Or it was a pig. I'd like to think it was a pig and not some horse/goat/bat hybrid that was the cursed child of a Satan worshipper or some shit. I never went back to Jersey to visit the grandparents while they still had that freaking cabin. I was solo backpacking in an area I'm extremely familiar with to test some new gear before a more serious backpacking trip. It was about 5 p.m. and I was at around 7,000 plus foot in the Sierra Nevada mountains outside of Tahoe on a ridge with a very breathtaking and interesting outcropping. The stone was very geometric and when you knocked on it, it rang like a hollow storage tank. I kept some pieces of the rock because I found them interesting. As I'm putting the rocks I picked into my backpack for the hike down to a spot I had selected earlier for camp, I hear a fluttering noise not unlike a pigeon landing. I turn my head quickly but without much thought to see the bird, and what I see instead is a praying mantis. This mantis was at least 5 feet long. It stood very erect and its abdomen was curved to a very extreme angle, allowing it to stand roughly chest height to me. I'm 6 feet. I was couched down so the thing was eye level. It grabbed a piece of food I had been eating and stared at me as it ate it, then its wings popped out and it flew off. I felt very nauseous and had a very bad migraine afterwards, which isn't strange as I suffer from cluster headaches. I chalk it up to dehydration and a migraine, but the memory is so real. I have a story, but it's about something I heard that scared the shit out of me. I was on a student exchange program to the US, specifically New Mexico. I'm not from the US BTW. And near the end of my stay, my host family, the dad, mom, me and their 2 daughters, decided to go camping. When it was getting dark, 16-year-old me and the 2 daughters decided to go climb a tree a bit away from the campsite, and when we reached the top of a tree we stopped dead in our tracks because of a sound I'll never forget. The youngest daughter, who was 14, was calling my name, which is a typical Dutch name, so not so nothing some New Mexico local would just shout since they have trouble pronouncing it. The thing was, this girl was sitting just below me, not saying a word. We sat there as this thing, whatever it was, kept shouting my name in her voice for what felt like an eternity but was actually just 5 minutes. And when it stopped we bolted back to campsite where the mom and dad were sitting just enjoying the evening. But when we told them, the dad's face became pale as a ghost and immediately told us to grab our things because we were leaving, and 5 minutes later we were gone. To this day I still have no idea WTF that was, and the dad never wanted to talk about it. I'll repost my story. I'd like to know if anyone else has had similar experiences with cryptids. I am an outdoorsman. I'm very experienced in hunting, camping, hiking, and general survival. I'm very familiar and used to wildlife, and I was charged by what I believe was a cryptid called a dogman. It charged me and my cousin. It was not a bear. A bear cannot move how it did. And it was not a normal wolf, as they can't comfortably run on 2 legs, whereas what charged us seemed natural at doing. I can elaborate further if you wish. This happened around June or July of 2007, I believe. I was around 17 years old and more cocky then, but still somewhat knowledgeable of the outdoors. My family used to own a cabin in NW, Wisconsin. I basically grew up there in the summer. I knew the woods well, but at night it was wise to stay in the cabin or at least by the bonfire by the beach, because of bears, wolves, and cougars. One of the creepiest things was, if you were having a bonfire, the tree line was visible from the fire pit and beach, and at night you always felt like you were being watched from that tree line. But during the day the woods always seemed normal, not so creepy. That is until this incident. So this happened somewhere between 1200 to 1400. Me and my cousin were having an airsoft battle. I was in full woodland camo, he was not. I retreated onto the ADV trail into the woods for a tactical advantage, and our battle took us about 200 meters into about a third of the way up the trail. We had enough at this point and were standing at the edge of a clearing on the trail talking, and he was maybe 10 feet from me. When I decided to mess with him, I shushed him and said, "We're being watched." He froze. Then I realized the woods were dead quiet, and I got spooked and started scanning the tree line and the other edge of the clearing from left to right when I saw it. Its teeth gave it away. It was panting and staring at my cousin. I don't expect you to believe me, but what I saw was a wolf as big as a black bear, at least 300 pounds, but it wasn't normal. This wolf was on 2 legs, crouching next to tree with its arm grasping the tree, grasping with a clawed hand. It had reddish-brown fur. I told my cousin that we have to go, and next thing I know he is sprinting, and I look back at Wolfie, who had locked on and sprinted a few steps on 2 feet, and then I turned and ran. When it looked like Wolfie was dropping to all fours, it charged us and sounded right on our asses, barreling through the brush, but for whatever reason let us go when we broke out of the tree line and headed for the cabin. What stuck with me the most was the sheer size. Wolfie appeared to be nearly 7 tall when upright, and that where it should have had front paws it appeared to have large clawed hands. Now I'm not sure how to explain it away rationally. I have heard wolves will occasionally kind of walk upright, but as far as I know they can't sprint on 2 legs, nor do wolves get that big, and black bears more waddle on 2 legs. The closest description is silly, a werewolf or dogman. Thank you for reading. I don't believe in ghosts or anything, but I did see something weird earlier this week. I work in a hospital where supposedly there's ghosts everywhere. That's what the cleaning staff always tells me. They claim they're in the basement area the most. One lady, who was fired a few months ago, always said a shadow followed her in the basement. Well, I went down to the basement earlier this week, into the laundry room to grab some linen, and as I'm unlocking the door, it has a passcode. I was hearing what sounded like a girl talking. I assumed this was the manager of the Environmental Services Department talking on the voice chat things we carry, but no one was there. Mind you, when I opened the door I didn't hear the talking anymore, but I thought I heard footsteps. But when I got the back, nothing. And to get out, the person would have either had to have walked past me out the main door, or out the back door. But to get out the back door you have to walk over this metal weight station that's very loud, and I would have heard that. Could have been my imagination, and I'm not saying it was for sure a ghost or something. Just a weird thing that happened this week, haha. One time my dad and I saw a literal flying banana in the sky. Before you say it was a blimp, it was going extremely fast and time jumping almost. It was the weirdest shit. Either aliens have made their UFOs into bananas, or some moron made a banana plane, not blimp, a literal banana plane, and decided to drive it over suburban New England in 2003. I was out fishing with my brothers and cousins. Our uncle and a few of his buddies rented a boat for the day. It was fairly normal as far as fishing trips go, but when it was at that twilight stage, sun is still up but everything is a dark orange hue, we started heading back towards town, when something swam under us. It had to have been pretty huge to rock us around like that. I didn't get a good look, but I swear it was a giant goddamn fish, like whale size huge. Might be exaggerating a bit. The fact remains something has always been out there. My grandparents used to tell stories about our ancestors and the creature in the lake, none of them scary. It seems to want to be left alone. Anyway, click the link to learn more. Oh, do I have a good one? I live in suburban Illinois and I never had any weird experience until about 10 years ago. I have a forest preserve outside my house that's pretty huge. One day, while I was looking out my window, I saw a huge black cat with a long curly tail. It looked to be at least 7 feet long and it was prowling low to the ground. I went back to try to tell my mom about it, and unfortunately the cat was no longer there. I thought I was just imagining things until about last year when I read an article in the Chicago Tribune about mythical beasts seen in Illinois, and one of them was giant black panthers. I literally have never freaked out more than when I read that article. When I had turned 16, I was taking my truck home from some friends with my little brother in the front seat, and it had deer lights on it. So naturally, since we lived kind of out away from the city in a college town, I turned them on about halfway home, and that's how we rode home. Illegal, but nonetheless, they lit up the sky and about 300 feet in front of the truck. Anyway, we come around the bend towards the house, and up in the tree around the corner we see what I could only describe as the bat creature from Dead Space climbing up the tree. My brother and I both saw it, too. It wasn't like it was just me watching this thing climb the tree. I know, it could have been an owl, etc., but it was using hands that were much like that of a bat's to climb up, at the pointy bit of the wing. We both booked it inside after we got home. Posted this before on another thread, but maybe you'll enjoy it. Grew up in Detroit. At an early age both me and my brother started seeing ghosts or things we couldn't explain, but when I was in middle school things started to get a little weirder. One night I woke up and couldn't fall back to sleep, so as I laid on my back staring at the dimly lit ceiling from my nightlight I felt my stomach turn. I looked out my bedroom door. My door was always open and I could see partially into my parents' bedroom, and I thought one of my parents were coming out of their room, but it was a tall 6-7 foot man with a brown jacket and brimmed hat. He walked straight towards me. Well, it was more like gliding, but I put my head under my covers and screamed for my parents. The light came on and they asked me what happened, but when I told them they chalked it up to being a nightmare. Well, this happened about 4 or 5 more times and my mom started to believe me, but my dad wasn't really convinced that the brown jacket man was real. When I started high school, my dad had put 2 additions on our house, a huge back room and an entire second floor. Me and my brother shared the second floor during high school. The main big room was our bedroom, and we had a walk-in closet, bathroom. It was here where we had the scariest encounter of our lives. Our bed sat about 4 or 5 feet off the floor, and our room at night glowed a dark blue from our ceiling fan's blue light. And one night I was lying there trying to sleep when I heard the voice of a man, but it sounded sped up and playing backwards. I had heard this before with other encounters in our home, but it was coming from our closet, bathroom, and that's when I heard my brother say, "Dude, do you hear that?" I was so relieved that he was awake, but I couldn't believe he heard it too, so I replied, "The voice, that sounds like it's talking backwards." "Yeah, I hear it." We both sat up in our beds and the voice kept talking. We started to hear footsteps with the voice, which was now pacing back and forth. Then the door handle started freaking out. I am getting chills just typing and rethinking about this, so I leaned over my bed rail so I could see the door handle shaking. My brother looked as if he was gonna jump out of his bed and run down the damn stairs. But then the door opened and I instantly said, "What do you see?" Because the way my brother's bed was positioned, he could see right into the closet. But he said he saw nothing in the doorway, and then slam, the door whipped shut and he jumped out of bed and turned on the lights. We finally got our courage up and opened the door and checked both the closet and bathroom, but nothing was in there and the voice had ceased. We thought maybe it was one of our cats, but nothing was in there and the windows were shut too. I got back in my bed and my brother stood next to me and we talked about what the hell just happened, when suddenly I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. I was looking at my brother, but he noticed it too because we both turned to look at the same time, and this white cloud-looking thing shot under our futon and we both froze. We looked under the futon, but once again nothing. We stayed up for a couple hours that night discussing what happened, and we still discuss it to this day. As time went on, the door handle would occasionally flip out again and the door would open and slam. Some of my friends witnessed this as well, and me and my brother saw the Hat Man a couple times in the early morning standing in the middle of our room. My dad would tell us, "Why would there be ghosts upstairs? I just built it, why would it be haunted?" My mom, however, finally believed us one day as I stayed homesick from school. We were watching a movie in the family room, which was right under me and my brother's bedroom, and we heard the closet door fly open upstairs and something ran across the room and then ran back to the closet and it slammed closed. My mom turned her head to me and she freaked out. "What the fuck was that?" she said, and I just replied with, "See? I told you." Other things were often heard too. I would often hear a little girl laughing or talking. She would even say my name from time to time. One time she whispered hi into my ear as I was laying in my bed one morning. My brother and I had a theory that ghosts were connected to this old baseball bat that was found in my parents' closet when they first moved in the house. It was a dark red wooden bat that had the year 1901 on it. We still have the bat, but my brother has since sanded it down and made it smooth, which I did not agree with, but he did it anyway. We moved out of the house in the late 2000s, but the Hat Man followed and so did some activity. No reverse talking ghosts though. Sometimes I thought of ringing the doorbell and asking the new family that lives there if they have experienced anything. The last time I saw the Hat Man was a few years ago, maybe 2012-2013. I was experimenting with lucid dreaming, astral travel, and one night I awoke with sleep paralysis, and sometimes I wouldn't see anything during sleep paralysis and other times I would see shadow people or a black thing sitting on my chest, but this time the Hat Man was at the foot of my bed and he had 2 children with him, one at each side. Both of these kids looked old-timey. They were dressed as if they were from the early 1900s. One was a boy maybe around the age of 10-12 and he had an old-looking suit on, and the other was a little girl in a white dress. She was probably 6-7 years old, and I instantly thought, that's the girl that said hi. And then they vanished. Sorry for length and grammar, punctuation, quickly typed this from a phone. One night I was driving through North Florida on my way down to my parents' winter home with a friend. We were in some backwoods desolate area on SR19 and you could only see in front of you as far as your headlights would go. Past that it was pitch dark. We were even joking with one another that if the road and everything else just dropped off there, we wouldn't have been able to see it when suddenly, we both watched this huge, black, cat-like creature slink across the highway. It was just beyond the reach of my headlights, like you could barely see it, but as we got closer you could make it out just a little and see the reflective eyes. I know there are panthers in Florida but they're tan and I doubt they're as big as this was. My friend and I were both like, what the fuck was that? Basically at the same time after it crossed the road. We were in our late teens and both of us are adventurous type of people who aren't very easily scared, but this thing was fucking creepy and it freaked me out. I still have no idea what it was. TLDR, big cats are scary, big mystery aquatic animals worse. I was hunting squirrels one day after school in rural Miss. I was about 10 years old. I heard some calling out to one another and as the sun set, I tracked them to a grove of pines. I was in a hurry, so rather than work my way around the tree line, I came straight across a field towards them because the sun was setting. About midway across the field, a panther cried out from that grove of pines. It was that woman cry wild thing that shut down my legs. I literally fell to the ground in fear, clutching my gun like it was useless and important at the same time. I laid there for a while with my heart pounding, trying to make out movement ahead of me. Then behind me. Probably even looked up, I was so spooked. I worked my way down a base row and crossed a fence to the main road and walked home from there, about half a mile more down a dirt road. I did not fill my pants. But it was the second most frightened I've been in the wild. In my mid-30s, I was fishing in Titusville FL, north of the main bridge. In my 17-feet Mohawk canoe with a trolling motor, I felt like I could face anything, go anywhere. What I did not reckon is that I'd roll up on a pod of sleeping manatees. I didn't know they were there and had no idea what they would do if spooked. What they do is a beaver-like behavior, slapping their tails on the surface of the water. Except they ranged from 300 to 800 pounds and were 20 of them, according to the ranger I spoke to about it. This tail slap behavior caused my canoe to launch about 6 feet in the air in the front, no weight, and probably just a few inches off the water in the rear, with 150 pounds me and a small trolling motor and 30 pounds battery. All my equipment flew into the air. I even saw a good-sized croaker, a bait fish, launched into the air over where I was, who almost landed in my boat when he came down. I sat there in silence as the pod pulsed away, hardly making a ripple. For several minutes I was disoriented and had no idea what had happened. I made my way to shore, on the NASA Fuel Railway if you know the area, and almost threw up. I was so freaked out. For all I knew, for several minutes, it was Nessie and her children who had launched me into the air. One time while driving home, to Mississippi from Memphis, Tennessee, my wife was driving over a bridge. Towards the end of the bridge we both saw what looked like a pale woman wearing white in the middle of the road. She turned to face us and we drove right through her. Other than gasping at the same time, we didn't say any words until after we passed through her. We both described the exact same woman, but nobody was there. I was at a party with my cousins. I was getting tired and my older cousin offered to walk me home. On the way home he starts telling me about when him and our friend Felipe were walking in some woods we used to hang out in. He said they saw hoof prints in the mud, but not like a four-legged animal, but as if a human had hoof feet and was stretching their legs out, taking long steps. I was just listening until we saw this person walking across the street up ahead of us. My cousin stopped and asked me if I had seen it. I said yeah, that person who walked across the street? He said yeah, but did you see it? I said yeah, he had long legs. And a short body, right? My cousin said. We ran up to the street and looked down the sidewalk and no one was there. I'm on mobile RN and can't give a full response until tomorrow, but here's a short version. Be me. Family and self into urbex. Hear about abandoned farm while visiting cousins and aunt. We decide to visit it, at night, gives me a spookiness. 6 of us pile into van, arriving there at 10 p.m. Explore farm for a while, really overgrown and creepy looking. See candlelight in farmhouse suddenly. A farmhouse that has windows covered in kudzu and a boarded shut door. Weird looking dudes in tattered 40s clothes inside. One of us transfixed, literally can't look away despite others telling her to run. Finally she runs to van, just as person steps out back. As said person rounds corner, next to tray line, they ain't a person. Weird, lanky, dark-furred thing with coal red eyes. They pause a moment. Then suddenly decide 6v1 is good odds and charge our van. They clear 100 yards, I think that's like 150 meters off the top of my head, in mere seconds, doing some strange gallop. Manage to keep pace with our van as we drive off, even try to jump on at some point, leaving deep scratches on it we notice the next morning. We refer to the thing as a demon for years after, not really knowing what the hell we saw. Years later find similar story. Calls it a skinwalker, so now that's what I call it. I've seen 3 things in my life that I can't explain. First one I saw when I was 12, I lived in South Texas at the time so I was very grounded in my belief that everything could be explained. While I was walking through the woods I found a little shack, as any 12-years-old kid would. I went inside and looked out the window. All I could see was a boomerang-shaped blob thing with a wing on the bottom and top of the curve. It flew away at high speed after I saw it. Second thing that happened was when I was 16, I was walking around in the woods about 30 miles north of the shack. I was carrying a .38 special revolver my dad had given me. There was a deer that had very little fur, stood on 2 legs like a human and had massive antlers, like probably 3 feet across 2 feet tall, kind of massive. When I see the thing it started to come at me, I pulled the revolver and shot. I hit the deer monster thing and it turned and ran. I tracked it for a while but I never found the body. Final thing I've seen that cannot be explained. I was once again walking around in the woods but I was more east of the deer monster sighting. I was carrying my 1911 that I had bought recently. All of a sudden I got to a clearing and I started to feel a sense of dread. As I walked further into the clearing I start to cry for no reason other than the sense of dread and grief I was feeling. When I stopped to wipe my eyes I looked up and I saw a bear. This is in South Texas and I knew for sure there was no bears in Texas, so I pull my gun just in case and bear screams at me like a girl saying while screaming, "You should not be here, leave now." I still don't know what I was seeing but I booked it out of there. From northern Ontario here, and there's been many sightings of strange creatures around the area I'm from. The first one I was told about is the hairy man that lives between the town I live in and approximately 45 minutes north of it. As a kid I was told stories about him and how my friends' parents, relatives encountered what is essentially Bigfoot. I always took their stories with a grain of salt until last year when my friend and his family were driving north of here and they seen it walk out of a ditch, cross the highway, and disappear into the woods. A family traveling in a minivan coming from the other direction also stopped and witnessed the event. The police were called and when they showed up all they found was 2 excited families, a print or 2 of huge feet, and a strong smell of what they described as rotting garbage. If I can I'll try to find the pictures of the foot imprints they took and post them here later. And second story I heard was about a dinosaur sighting that was witnessed by quite a few people at a lake also north of here. This sighting took place approximately 70 years ago at a now long abandoned town at the edge of the lake. One elder I heard the story from told me they watched what looked like a brontosaur walking through the forest with the head of it clearing the top of the forest canopy. They watched it slowly walk to the lake and then swim out to where the lake gets huge and disappear around the bend. To help you picture what the area looks like, picture an upside-down snowman with the town located at the top of the head and the larger part of the lake the midsection of the body. The dinosaur, they said, went from left to right before disappearing out of sight. Sorry for my horrible storytelling. I really should have wrote it out a tad more sober than I am now. I had a number of encounters several years ago with a golem-type creature that lived on my friend's property, which was the last 20-30 acres of a farm that hadn't yet been developed into houses. The first few times I didn't actually see it but heard it from afar at night. It seemed to watch me and move parallel to me, but from the way it was walking it seemed like a human figure walking on all fours. My friend wasn't surprised by this and told me he has heard it as well. I had a few encounters like that, and one night my friend and I stayed up all night and were smoking cigarettes on top of a building out in the farm right before the sun rose. We saw this thing, pale white, running on all fours in the distance. Closest I could describe it is like Golem from Lord of the Rings. This was in the Treasure Valley in Idaho, if anyone is curious. The land it was living on has since been developed. It was a really dark night, like really blackout. I was on my way to a small midway town between Melbourne and Canberra via bus. It was just me and the driver. I hadn't seen another car for a while or any houses, just empty cow paddocks and trees. I'm looking out the window at the trees buzzing by and suddenly I see this thing. It was huge, like impossibly big, body as thick as a tree trunk and arms and legs as twice as long as the bus. Its body was so dark I almost couldn't see it. This thing was running, and it was fast. It was just running in the paddocks near the road, chasing the bus, leaping over fences and its arms swinging behind it. Then as another car came past the other way, it vanished, like it was never there to begin with. I literally have too many stories. I'm a magnet for this shit. There's the one where my friends saw something that had my face following them in the woods, only to go back to the house 2 seconds later and discover that I've been on the couch the whole time with other people. There's the one where something pissed at me in my ear, and then I got to watch 4 of my cats watch this invisible thing walk around my first floor for 15 minutes. Then there's the time that I fucked around with a Ouija board after being warned by my mom, who herself and my aunt and her family had a bad experience, not to touch it. I did. Wound up having these shadow figures stare at me from a closet. That same friend group from before and I also saw a UFO out in the middle of Nokesville, Virginia one night we were sleeping over, if we're counting aliens as cryptids. I've got more. If anyone wants to hear the goods from those, I'm more than happy to post. My friend swears that he saw a faceless, white, 8-foot-tall man that looked like he was made of paper, and it chased him through the woods for quite a ways. He thought it was a bear, so he flipped it off. He was a 13-year-old stoner, so I guess it made sense to him, and it turned around and made a cricket-like noise, and chased him to this bar in the middle of the woods, then disappeared. Here is mine. It's a copy-paste from one of my previous comments. Just for a better understanding of my surroundings, I'm from Kentucky. Lots of wooded area and people love their guns, including me. I used to not believe that there was unknown stuff in the woods. I thought maybe Bigfoot, maybe, could be real, but I severely doubted it. After this happened, I know there is something unknown out there. I had just bought my first AR-15 style rifle, Ruger AR-556 for anyone who cares, and bought a 60-round drum magazine for it at Gander Mountain while they were going out of business, because why the fuck not? Reading up on the drum, I read they were amazing and rarely had any issues at all. This will important later. A few days after I got it, I finally decided to take it out for a test drive and sight in my gun a little better. Here's where everything went to shit. As I said above, Kentucky is super wooded. 3/4 of the land I lived on was just thick woods. There was a main path for driving our gator and few small paths our cows had made in the woods. I decided to walk along our creek that had a small path half cleared by our cows. At the end of the path is a big field our cows graze in and where I sight in guns when the cows aren't there. As soon as I crossed the fence to go to the field, I instantly felt like I was being watched, closely. I brushed it off because I've walked back there 1,000 times before and never been bothered by anything. So, I keep walking and ignore the feeling of being watched, but at the same time, I'm aware of the feeling. I know I feel like I'm being watched, but I wasn't giving it any noticeable attention. The walk to the field along the creek is a very short walk, maybe 2 minutes at a slow pace. The further I walked, the more intense the feeling got, like I was getting closer to whatever was watching me. About halfway there, the feeling got so intense, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The drum magazine I had with me was unloaded, so I stopped and started loading it. I only brought 20 rounds with me because I was just going to sight in my gun and 20 should have been plenty. So, now I'm stopped, paying extremely close attention to what's going on around me and loading my magazine. The exact moment I started putting rounds in the drum, I smelled something dead, like it had been dead for a while and rotting in the sun. I started looking around and right behind me was what was left of a possum. It was torn to pieces. It was almost like it was placed there for me to find. The only thing was it looked like it had been dead maybe a day at most, and what I was smelling seemed like it was far more decomposed. This obviously didn't set well with me, so I double-timed it on the magazine loading. I guess I should have taken the dead possum as a last chance to turn around. I decided to keep going. I had never had any problems back there before, so I assumed my brain was just being paranoid. I was almost to the field when I saw it. I was at the end of the creek and the feeling of being watched was unbearable. Just as I was near the end of the creek and the edge of the woods, I heard a splash in the water. Me being on edge, immediately turned toward the noise, gun ready but no round in the chamber. Walking down the creek away from me was something I will never forget. At least 8 feet tall, probably taller. Very skinny. Imagine a grown man that weighs 120 pounds. Now stretch him out to be 8 feet tall, but his body width stays the same. Very long arms, and it walked on 2 legs. Skin stretched tightly across its body. It made no noise, aside from the splash when it stepped in the creek, while it walked. It also had a very weird walk, almost like a waddle, but taking large steps. But that could have been because it was on a muddy creek bank. It was also a light brown color, almost like the color of a deer. That's all I can remember about it right now. I will edit it later if I remember anything else. Now I know why I felt like I was being watched. Magazine loaded, bolt ready to send around in the chamber. Remember what I said about the magazine being extremely reliable? I press the bolt release on the gun to chamber around just in case this monstrous thing decides to attack. I did not intend on striking first. The round gets stuck somehow and doesn't even budge out of the magazine. I had never used that magazine before, so it didn't fail from heavy use. A bolt closing from a gun has enough force to break your finger, so why didn't this magazine work? My only guess is that thing had something to do with it. The magazine never worked right again and I had to return it to Magpul. Needless to say, I didn't tell them this happened, I just told them the magazine failed several times. Anyway, back to the thing. Gun jammed on the first round, which is usually the easiest. The thing books it out of there without running or making a noise. I had just long enough exposure to it to get the details I provided about it. Now, for assumptions. It happened about late May last year. I still have the emails from Magpul regarding the drum, so I'm using those as reference because after this, I needed something reliable. As for what the creature was, me and a friend who knows more about this stuff than I do have decided it could have been a fucking wendigo. The reason we think wendigo is because everything I described matches them near perfectly. I had read that they are incredibly thin and tall, have a stench of death that follows them everywhere, explains the smell at the possum, very fast, can be several colors, light brown included, and that they sometimes violently kill other animals to scare humans. Again, the possum. The only thing that we couldn't come up with is its behavior. Why am I still alive? Wendigos are supposed to be incredibly aggressive. Aside from watching me, it did nothing. didn't try to attack or confront me, it ran from me like it was scared or trying to draw me where it wanted me. This being said, I have never had another encounter with it. I have gone to the same field taking the same path expecting to be watched and have not gotten that feeling of being watched as strongly as that day. Something was out there and you can't convince me otherwise. I've tried to trick myself into thinking I am being watched out there and it still had no comparison between that day. If anyone else here in the comments may have any questions you'd like me to answer, please ask. I just need to talk about it to help get it off my chest. Also, if anyone has any information on what I might have saw or a better guess, please tell me. I need to know what is in my woods. Sorry for the novel, but I felt like I needed to include every little detail I could to better explain the situation. The little details really bring out how absolutely fucked I could have been. Every little thing just happened to line up to fuck me. Edit for extra detail I forgot to add, tons of Native American presence has been in my area. I find large amounts of flint every year, but the proof that they were here is the arrowheads I find. There is also a trail of deer site less than 5 miles away from my home, which is a possible origin point for it because I'm sure plenty of them got desperate on that.